Hi, I'm Judith Dreyer. Thank you for joining me for this podcast series, The Holistic Nature of Us. My intent is to take us, you and I, into a better understanding of the concepts behind our holistic nature and how that ties directly to the holistic nature of the world around us. How can we connect the dots in practical ways that we are in nature and nature is in us? I will be featuring authors and educators, practitioners and others whose passion for this earth helps us create bridges. We'll see what's trending, what's relevant to our world today, not just for land use, but to connect the dots between ourselves and nature. It's time for practical action and profound inner change so our natural world is valued once again. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to Ajamu Ayinde. Ajamu is a certified medical hypnotherapist and transpersonal hypnotherapy trainer. He is certified in clinical hypnosis since 1995. Ajamu specializes in hypnotic childbirth preparation, pediatric hypnosis, and cancer support. He was honored as Therapist of the Year by the International Association of Counselors and Therapists in 2004. And he received further honors from the National Association of Transpersonal Therapists in 2012 and in 2017 for his work with athletes and pregnant couples. He sees clients in Carmel, New York, and worldwide via Skype. Welcome, Ajamu. I'm so delighted that you are here today. We have lots to talk about and lots to share.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with your journey into the world of hypnotherapy, your holistic interest in helping others. Let's begin with that.
Okay. My journey has been a wonderful and long journey. I had the wonderful, great pleasure of being born to a mother who was holistically minded. She and my dad did Lamaze for my sister, who was born in 1967, but it didn't really work the way that she had been told that it would work, so she wanted to find other kinds of approaches. So she and my dad found a book on hypnosis written by a doctor. The book was actually written in 61, but she used it in 67 and 68, and they didn't have any direct formal instruction. They just had the book, but they worked with the exercises and the visualizations, and she was able to give birth to me in a very, very short time without so much as an aspirin. And all my life, I knew about this. All my life, I knew that hypnosis was a powerful tool, that it could be used in many different areas. And what I saw on television when women were on sitcoms and they were giving birth and it was so painful and everyone was screaming, I would turn to my mom and say, is that what it was like for you? And she's like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. And also, my mom was really cool because she continued to stay with hypnosis beyond just using it for the childbirth experience. She was able to go on to study something called Silva mind control in the early 70s. And so she was a real big advocate of programming, changing the way that we think and respond to things. So she would hypnotize myself and my sister all through our childhood. So I always knew that hypnosis was there. I used it in lots of different areas for myself personally, but I didn't know you could be a hypnotherapist. I didn't know that was a profession. She worked with adolescents. She worked with what was called juvenile delinquents at the time in a locked facility in the Bronx. And she did that for 31 years. And she did a lot of hypnosis on herself to get through that because it's a very stressful job to have. But she also used it with her charges, with the children she was charged with watching and helping them to find another way of looking at life, another way of looking at themselves. So I gravitated toward that same path, and I became a school teacher. I taught in high schools and junior high schools and gradually moved toward using the hypnosis once I realized it could be an actual profession, using that to work directly with children. So instead of having 30 or 40 kids in a class, I was able to work with one student individually and see quicker, better results.
That's really interesting. Your mom was really a forward thinker back then because she had to do it on her own. As you mentioned, there was really probably not a whole lot of guidance right there. But to work in a locked facility, is stressful, and you're dealing with, I think, a lot of um, stuck mind patterns,
Yes.
the stubbornness of not giving up an addiction, the stubbornness
Yes.
of all these different issues that occur in that arena. So you had her as a guide, you had her stories, and then you also had your own roots to it. So tell us more about the hypnotherapy from a holistic point of view in terms of we know it works with the mind, we know it works with some of the mind patterning, it works
Mm,
with the brain centers. If you could tell us about that, I'd appreciate it.
absolutely. I think that as a medical hypnotherapist, it's important to have an understanding not only of psychology, but an understanding of physiology, of anatomy, of how the different organ systems work together. And I've taught myself that, and I feel that when we're working with medical practitioners, doctors, nurses, it's important to be able to speak their language as best we can and to help them to see that there is a scientific basis for what we do. I'm a very low-key person. I'm not a flashy salesman type. I offer something that's very practical and very realistic for the doctors and nurses to kind of think about. And that's like a 10% diminution or a 10% reduction in whatever kind of symptoms their patient is dealing with. And so if a person has pain on a 10 scale, their pain is a 9 or an 8, helping that person to bring their pain level down to a 7 or a 6 is not unreasonable. It's not sounding like it's over-promising. However, I do my best to over-deliver. I do my best to help that person to get their pain level down to a 1 or a 2, but if I approach them and say that's what I'm going to do, they may not believe it. So
Right, right.
it's important to know what the model is of the person that you're working with. The medical model is the dominant model for most people. The mind-body model is very new to many practitioners. But to speak to what you're asking, the model that I practice is something called transpersonal or spiritual. So there are different ways of practicing hypnosis. So you have medical hypnosis, you have clinical hypnosis, you have transpersonal or spiritual hypnosis. All of these different approaches can address weight loss, for example, or stress, or smoking, or pain. However, one is looking at it from one, I don't want to say limited perspective, but one is looking at it from a purely medical perspective. Again, the clinical model is looking at how can we look to the mind patterns, etc. And in the transpersonal model, we're open to the medical model. We're open to looking at the psychology, going back to early childhood trauma, releasing those things. But we're also looking at the deeper meaning. We're also looking at potentially a past life situation. Sometimes the results that someone has been able to achieve with clinical hypnosis are limited, and they keep running against a wall. And if a client is in fact grounded in a kind of spirituality, whatever that might be, then that's something that they may want to explore with their practitioner. However, people who are practicing purely clinical hypnosis, they may not have the wherewithal to work within the belief systems of their client. They may not, quote, believe in ghosts, or they may not believe that someone's departed grandmother is speaking to them, or they may not believe that the person has had a curse put on them. I've worked with many people in the Black community, in the Spanish-speaking community, even in the white community, who believe in curses, believe in bad energy that can be directed at them. And by being able to enter their model of the world, it's not saying that I believe that that's the case for them, but being able to be person-centered allows me to look at the world the way that they look at the world and help them to come out of the difficulty that they're in using a path that works for them, that makes sense to them. So I'm not taking them in a direction that they wouldn't want to go. I'm using what they're telling me to help them to break free of that, quote, spell.
That's interesting. I'm getting the sense that the transpersonal approach is very holistic because you're taking into account the all of us, the psychology, the mental stuff, the emotional stuff, and the spiritual stuff, rather
Absolutely.
than just focusing. I'm a hypnotist. I'm going to deal with, you know, smoking cessation and weight loss in particular, but you're using this transpersonal field to affect the holistic unit that we are as a human being. That's very interesting. Can you give us a story, something that you found really inspiring?
I am constantly inspired by the things that my clients share with me. One of the things I want all of the listeners to know is that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So I'm not putting anyone under. I don't have any special magical powers of persuasion. When we enter into the altered state, it is a shared trance. I'm in hypnosis while my client is in hypnosis. I'm not as deep as they are because, that wouldn't help, but I'm in an altered state at the same time. I don't get to work with many men. Typically, 95% of my clients are women. But I had this male client maybe about a year ago, and he had been a very, very successful stockbroker, Wall Street guy, made a lot of money. However, he had a very serious drinking problem, and he had come to me to address that. Now, he happened to be very metaphysically oriented, very spiritually oriented. He had done some mushrooms in his youth and so forth. So he was open to looking at this from not a purely 12-step way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm familiar with the 12-step model, but he wanted to go a different way. So because I am a transpersonal hypnotherapist, I was able to meet him in his model. So one of the things that really was powerful for me is the way that we would take a journey, and I wouldn't tell him what was there. He would tell me what he was encountering while we were kind of meandering through this inner world. So I started off by helping him create what we called a safe space, an inner world that would allow him to have a sanctuary from the different emotions and stressors that would cause him to drink. And once we found that special place for him, we were able to then kind of populate it, kind of people it with what it is that would be helpful and needed for him. So he was able to connect with what he called the Divine Mother. He had had a very difficult relationship with his own mother, his biological mother, and by being able to almost reparent himself with this divine mother figure, he was able to make tremendous strides. From there, we moved to a different direction, and we began to look at some other tools in his sanctuary space. The first one that we were utilizing was his power animal. So for him, his power animal was a wolf, and he felt, I guess, for many years like an outsider. So the wolf was a natural kind of pairing for him. And he was able to meet with that wolf. He was able to communicate with that wolf, get guidance from that wolf, take that on, accept that as a mantle. There was a certain point at which he was wearing a cloak that was like the pelt of the wolf. So these are all powerful metaphors that are able to help people to feel that they're able to do things that they aren't able to do in their, quote, everyday state of consciousness. The altered state of consciousness, I call it the place of power and possibility. When one is in the altered state, there's no limit to what we can do. It's like being in a dream. Mm-hmm. In a dream, you can fly, you can do anything. And hypnosis is kind of like a waking dream. So he moved from the power animal to his inner shaman. So it's almost like this, he morphed with the wolf to become a wolf-like man who was like a medicine person. He was a powerful person, and by engaging in some of those rituals in his space, and his space was very unusual. It was kind of like an Alaskan Arctic, very Spartan kind of space. Usually people want to go to someplace nice and tropical and whatever, but this was a very harsh inhospitable environment. And in many cases, the shaman of Siberia, that's the environment that they lived in. So that was his model. So he was working on becoming a shaman, doing those rituals, working with the rattles and so forth, and drums, and that was able to really give him something. And then the final stage of his work was meeting his elder self. So let's say he was in his 30s. He was meeting the man that he was going to be in his 50s. And he encountered that person. They looked in each other's eyes. He saw the wrinkles in the man's face and the scars, and they were able to connect. And he was able to see that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, that he didn't have to be a, quote, slave to his addiction, that he could break the chains, and that he had become the man that he always wanted to be. Now, what we do in hypnosis is we're getting a coming attractions for our lives. We're looking at what it is that we really want to have, and we're experiencing all the emotions in advance. And because we're experiencing them this way, and because we can't distinguish between the things we vividly imagine and the things that are real, then we are able to feel those emotions, and we're propelled toward those actions, the actions that we need to take in the present, in the here and now, that are going to move us toward that goal. Everyone could move forward quickly. Everyone could go forward in life, but they don't believe they can. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They don't see who they're going to be once they take that leap, once they apply for that job, once they ask that person out. But in hypnosis, you can kind of get that coming attractions, and then you can feel like, yeah, this is something I can do.
That's such a fascinating story on so many levels. Addictions are hard. You've got a very stressful, high-powered position on top of it. The demands alone have to be enormous. But it sounds like you are able to bring, I love the sanctuary. You were able to bring him to a sanctuary where he could create something that was empowering. And he was open to it. That's the key. He was open to it. And like you said, I can see the value of what transpersonal hypnosis does in particular, because you're working on getting to the deeper belief system. Because I don't believe we really can change something in our life if we don't believe we can change it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I may, I want to acknowledge for our listeners some of my teachers. I come from a martial arts tradition. My spiritual journey kind of began with Buddhism as a young man. And because I was in the Asian and martial arts, there's a big emphasis on honoring one's teacher and one's teacher's teacher. So when I got to hypnosis, I approached it with that same kind of reverence and wanting to give credit where credit was due. There's a lot of big personalities in the holistic world, and a lot of people who have fairly big egos. And I try not to go that way. I try to say, this is thus I was taught, as we say in Buddhism. And I want to talk about some of my teachers. Some of them have passed away, and so I want to mention their names.
Oh, yes, please.
Michael Elner is someone who took me under his wing. He taught me medical hypnosis. He introduced me to people in the HIV/AIDS community, got me working outside of my comfort zone, which at the time was working with children in a high school setting. And I was deathly, no pun intended, deathly afraid of working with cancer and with HIV and with Lou Gehrig's disease. But this is what he did on a regular basis. And he taught me a lot of the things that I use today. I also want to acknowledge Alan Chips. He was my trainer. I became a trainer under him in '97 in transpersonal hypnosis, and he has succumbed to cancer himself. So he's an ancestor now that I always want to honor when I teach my certification classes. I teach from his textbook. I want to acknowledge my mom, of course, who was my first teacher, who I learned hypnosis from. I want to acknowledge Dick Sutphin, who is still with us, who is one of the earliest pioneers in past life regression. I studied with him long, long ago. I want to acknowledge someone else who's alive, and that's David Quigley. He's the founder of alchemical hypnosis, and that was one of the most extensive trainings that I've done. It was a full 30-day training that I immersed myself in. I had to kind of live there, and there was all kinds of transforming work that happened. So I feel like any of our listeners who want to go further and really want to understand what transpersonal hypnosis is, there are many different ways that it's practiced. Some people come at it from a Buddhist perspective. Some people come at it from a metaphysical Christian perspective, a la Edgar Cayce. Other people come at it from a Native American kind of perspective, sweat lodges, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different ways to practice spiritually. What's most important for me is our level of faith. The client may or may not have a belief system, and even if they do, their faith may not be that strong. We have to hold that energy for them, that belief that there is a possibility, there is a way out of their difficulty. If we don't believe that they can get better, if we're hypnotized by their condition, then there is no hope. So we have to always be the ones to think in terms of optimism, in terms of possibility.
That's interesting that you can hold the space for that, because we know as our conscious awareness is changing and growing on this planet, that if we are all one, then what's in one is in the whole. And so if I'm looking at someone, say, as a practitioner, as you just mentioned, and I can feel and give them my sense of healing, it does have an impact whether we can measure it or not.
There's so many related arts to what I do. I don't really do anything other than hypnosis. I'm not an herbalist. I'm not an acupuncturist. But these different holistic modalities work extremely well together. And Reiki is another one. So when I think about prayer, and I think about meditation, and I think about hypnosis, these are all using that same altered state. It's simply what you do in that state. So someone praying for someone in another city, in another country, has an impact, has a power on that person, even if they don't know that they're being prayed for. And these are studies, fortunately, that are being conducted by medical doctors who have a level of credibility that maybe you and I don't yet have. So Dr. Larry Dossey, for example, has written many books about these kinds of studies that are going on in hospitals and universities around the country, where we're seeing the power of prayer in people's lives. Not even just people who are people of faith, but just regular people who don't even believe are able to see a marked improvement in their health conditions as a result of being prayed for. So being able to be a calming presence, to be a peaceful presence with someone who's, let's say, in hospice, someone who is going to transition at some point, but not being fearful. Your bravery, again, holding the space for them allows them to have an easier letting go. Transpersonal hypnosis also allows people to complete communications. So let's say the person has some issue with their child or their father or their mother or spouse, and that's really something they need to get over. By using hypnosis, they're able to, almost like Gestalt therapy, they're able to communicate with that person. We call it on the ethereal plane. So if that person is no longer alive, or if that person is in another place, then we can have that person talk and say what it is that they would have said, should have said, could have said, and they can get it off their chest, so to speak, and that makes it much easier for them to let go and go to the light, as it were. So that's something that is always, always welcome when I do work in hospitals and such.
Interesting. Well, Ajamu, I always like to leave my listeners with 3 tips, something practical that they could put into their everyday life. What would you suggest?
Well, that's great. And that's the thing. Everyone can do self-hypnosis. Not everybody can do massage. Not everybody can do acupuncture. These are things that take many years to study and are very, very involved. Hypnosis is quite easy, actually. I've been studying it all my life, but I'm still it's simple. It's easy. So what first and foremost I would recommend to everyone is to know what you want. It doesn't make any sense for you to say, oh, I want to have more energy or I want to have more money. If I give you $1, you have more money now. You have to be very, very specific with what you want. That's the first key I would ask people to do. And it sounds really basic, but you'd be surprised at how many people are afraid to even ask for what they want. They're in a bad marriage, they're in a bad job, and they really want something else, but they're afraid to even think it's possible. So that's the first step. The next tool or tip that I would give is, why do you want it? Why do you want to have that new whatever, or the new house, or the family? I ask people to come up with 25 reasons why they want what they say they want. So if someone comes to me and says they want to stop smoking, I don't take on every client. You have to convince me that you're serious about this, because I like to feel that the work that I do is going to be effective, and it's not going to be effective with someone who is kind of wishy-washy. Mm-hmm. So 25 reasons, that's something I learned from Tony Robbins, by the way. I like to give credit where credit's due. And by giving those 25 reasons, by writing down all of the reasons why this is important to you, I'm able to use those things in the altered state to help that person move toward that change. And sometimes I put myself out of a job. Sometimes when I ask my clients to do this, then they say, well, I don't need the hypnosis. I really get it now. And so thanks for the help. And they move on and they do the change. The other thing I would like to ask everyone to do is affirmations. And everyone knows about affirmations. Many times they haven't resulted in the changes that people wanted. So I want to help people to understand how affirmations might work better for them. So in addition to having a very clear sense of what you want, I want to be healthy. Be able to see that. Saying I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy doesn't really work. Give yourself the time to form a mental image of what healthy looks like for you. So healthy might look like you're not walking with a limp, for example, or you're able to get up and down stairs easily. Everyone's going to have a different model, but you must see what the affirmation is saying. The words alone have no power, in my opinion. And in addition to that, be able to combine it with relaxation. Relaxation, visualization, and affirmation. I know it's a lot of Asians, but they all work together, and that's what self-hypnosis is. Relaxation, visualization, and affirmation. That's all it is. So you must be in the altered state when you do affirmations. You have to be in a state of mind where you're open to the possibility, where you're able to get the emotions. That's the key. The key is the emotion. So if you want to be successful, if you want to be a better public speaker, if you want to be a better lover, then what is the emotion that goes along with that imagery, that mental movie? If you can tap into that emotion, then those affirmations are working. If you don't feel anything, it's not working. So you want to make sure that you tap into the emotions that go along with that thing that you want. And even if you just do it for 5 minutes every day, it's going to work. You're going to get your result.
Yeah, again, we have to get our whole being behind what we want to do. And that's why when people follow their passion, they have that sense of, I cannot not do this. I have to do this. And then when we put our energy behind it, it's like the universe responds 100-fold. I mean, it's just amazing what happens when we really trust ourselves enough, our deeper self enough to get into the space of really believing whatever it is that we're wanting, we can create. That's really great. That's a great summary, and I really appreciate it. Ajamu, before we sign off today, could you leave us with all your contact information?
I want to first give people the spelling of my name because it is a little bit unusual. It is an African name, and sometimes people will mispronounce it and such. So it's Ajamu, and my last name is Ayinde. So if you wanted to Google me, you got the name now. So you can reach me at ajamuayinde@gmail.com. That's my email address that I answer all the time. You can also call me at 845-240-6470. As was said at the top of the hour, I do work with clients all over anywhere. I've worked with people in 28 states so far, and I've worked with 4 different countries. And anyone, anywhere can experience hypnosis via Skype or via telephone. and the results are just as effective. I've been doing it this way since 2011, but like I said, I've been doing hypnosis since 1995. So you can find me on Facebook. You can, I've got a couple business pages there. I've got a personal page if you want to connect on that level. And yes, harnesstheadvantage.com is my web address if you want to check out some of my articles and check out the training that I offer. If you're interested in becoming a certified hypnotherapist, you can let me know about that.
Sounds great. And I know it is you're well, I can find you very easily, and I can find all the information that you just suggested. So the listeners have some very easy resources to contact you.
Super.
Well, Ajamu, all I can say is thank you. I hope everyone feels as inspired as I do by what you've shared, your advice, but also your journey and stories. I find them very inspirational. So this is Judith Dreyer. I'm the author of At the Garden's Gate book and blog. My book is available through my website, which is www.judithdreyer, that's DREYER.com, as well as several distribution arms such as Amazon, Nook, Goodreads, and more. I'd like to remind all of you to please like and share the podcast. There will be a written transcript when the podcast is released. So let's work together and get the word out. And remember, it's time for practical action and profound inner change, so we and the world are valued once again. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.